Don Genaro sat up straight and slid closer to me. He patted me on the shoulder repeatedly, saying that I was a rascal. Then he pulled my left arm with great force towards him. I lost my balance and fell forward. I almost hit my face on the hard ground. I automatically put my right arm in front and buffered my fall. One of them held me down by pressing on my neck. I wasn't sure who. The hand that was holding me felt like Don Genaro's. I had a moment of devastating panic. I felt like I was fainting. Perhaps I did. The pressure in my stomach was so intense that I vomited. My next clear perception was that somebody was helping me to sit up. Don Genaro was squatting in front of me. I turned around to look for Don Juan. He was nowhere in sight. Don Genaro had a beaming smile. His eyes were shiny. They were looking fixedly at mine. I asked him, "What had you done to me?" and he said that I was in pieces. His tone was reproachful, and he seemed to be annoyed or dissatisfied with me. He repeated various times that I was in pieces and that I had to come together again. He tried to feign a severe tone, but he laughed in the middle of his harangue. He was telling me that it was just terrible that I was spread all over the place, and that he would have to use a broom to sweep all my pieces into one heap. Then he added that I might get the pieces in the wrong places and end up with my penis where my thumb should be. He cracked up at that point. I wanted to laugh and had a most unusual sensation. My body fell apart. It was as if I had been a mechanical toy that simply broke up into pieces. I had no physical feelings whatever, and neither had I any fear or concern. Coming apart was a scene that I witnessed from the point of view of the perceiver, and yet I didn't perceive anything from a sensorial point of reference. The next thing I became aware of was that Don Genaro was manipulating my body. I then had a physical sensation, a vibration so intense that it made me lose sight of everything around me. I felt once more that someone was helping me to sit up. I again saw Don Genaro squatting in front of me. He pulled me up by my armpits and helped me walk around. I couldn't figure out where I was. I had the feeling I was in a dream, and yet I had a complete sense of sequential time. I was keenly aware that I had just been with Don Genaro and Don Juan in the ramada of Don Juan's house. Don Genaro walked with me, propping me by holding my left armpit. The scenery I was watching changed constantly. I couldn't determine, however, the nature of what I was observing. What was in front of my eyes was rather like a feeling or a mood, and the center from where all those changes radiated was definitely in my stomach. I had made that connection not as a thought or a realization, but as a bodily sensation that suddenly became fixed and predominant. The fluctuations around me came from my stomach. I was creating a world, an endless run of feelings and images. Everything I knew was there. That, in itself, was a feeling, not a thought or a conscious assessment. I tried to keep tabs for a moment because of my nearly invincible habit of assessing everything, but at a certain instant my processes of bookkeeping ceased, and a nameless something enveloped me, feelings and images of every sort. At one point, something in me began again the tabulation, and I noticed that one image kept on repeating itself. Don Juan and Don Genaro, who were trying to reach me. The image was fleeting. It passed by me fast. It was something comparable to seeing them from the window of a fast-moving vehicle. They seemed to be trying to catch me as I went by. The image became clearer, and it lasted longer as it kept on recurring. I consciously realized at one point that I was deliberately isolating it from among a myriad of other images. I sort of breezed through the rest to come to that particular scene. Finally, I was capable of sustaining it by thinking about it. Once I had begun to think, my ordinary processes took over. They weren't as defined as in my ordinary activities, but clear enough to know that the scene or feeling I had isolated was that Don Juan and Don Genaro were in the ramada of Don Juan's house and were holding me by the armpits. I wanted to keep on fleeing through other images and feelings, but they wouldn't let me. I struggled for a moment. I felt bouncy and happy. I knew that I liked both of them, and I also knew that I wasn't afraid of them. I wanted to joke with them. I didn't know how, and I kept on laughing and patting them on their shoulders. I had another peculiar awareness. I was certain that I was dreaming. If I focused my eyes on anything, it immediately became blurry. Don Juan and Don Genaro were talking to me. I couldn't keep their words straight, and I couldn't distinguish which of them was talking. Don Juan then turned my body around and pointed to a lump on the ground. Don Genaro pulled me closer to it and made me go around it. The lump was a man lying on the ground. He was lying on his stomach, his face turned to his right. They kept on pointing out the man to me as they spoke. They pulled me and twisted me around him. I couldn't focus my eyes on him at all, but finally, I had a feeling of quietness and sobriety, and I looked at the man. I had a slow awakening into the realization that the man lying on the ground was me. My realization didn't bring any terror or discomfort. I simply accepted it, without emotion. At that moment, I wasn't completely asleep, but neither was I completely awake and in sober consciousness. I also became more aware of Don Juan and Don Genaro and could tell them apart when they talked to me. Don Juan said that we were going to go to the round power place in the chaparral. As soon as he said it, the image of the place popped in my mind. I saw the dark masses of bushes around it. I turned to my right. Don Juan and Don Genaro were also there. I had a jolt and the feeling that I was afraid of them. Perhaps because they looked like two menacing shadows. They came closer to me. As soon as I saw their features, my fears vanished. I liked them again. It was as if I were drunk and didn't have a firm grip on anything. They grabbed me by the shoulders and shook me in unison. They ordered me to wake up. I could hear their voices clearly and separately. I had then a unique moment. I held two images in my mind, two dreams. I felt that something in me was deeply asleep and was waking up, and I found myself lying on the floor of the ramada with Don Juan and Don Genaro shaking me. But I also was at the power place, and Don Juan and Don Genaro were still shaking me. There was one crucial instant in which I was neither in one place nor the other, but I was rather in both places as an observer seeing two scenes at once. I had the incredible sensation that at that instant, I could have gone either way. All I had to do at that moment was to change perspective, and rather than watch either scene from the outside, feel it from the point of view of the subject. There was something very warm about Don Juan's house. I preferred that scene. I next had a terrifying seizure, so shocking that my entire ordinary awareness came back to me at once. Don Juan and Don Genaro were pouring buckets of water on me. I was in the ramada of Don Juan's house. Hours later, we sat in the kitchen. Don Juan had insisted that I had to proceed as if nothing had happened. He gave me some food and said that I had to eat a great deal to compensate for my expenditure of energy. It was after 9 in the evening when I looked at my watch after we had sat down to eat. My experience had lasted several hours. From the point of view of my recollection, however, it seemed that I had just fallen asleep for a short while. Even though I was completely myself, I still was numb. It wasn't until I had begun to write in my notebook that I regained my usual awareness. It was a surprise to me that taking notes could bring about instantaneous sobriety. The moment I was myself again, a barrage of reasonable thoughts immediately came to my mind. They purported to explain the phenomenon I had experienced. I knew, on the spot, that Don Genaro had hypnotized me the moment he pinned me down on the ground, but I didn't attempt to figure out how he had done it. They both laughed hysterically when I expressed my thoughts. Don Genaro examined my pencil and said that the pencil was the key to wind up my mainspring. I felt quite belligerent. I was tired and irritable. I found myself practically yelling at them while their bodies shook with laughter. Don Juan said that it was permissible to miss the boat, but not by such a wide margin, and that Don Genaro had come exclusively to help me and show me the mystery of the dreamer and the dreamed. My irritability came to a peak. Don Juan signaled Don Genaro with a movement of his head. Both of them stood and took me around the house. There Don Genaro demonstrated his great repertoire of animal grunts and cries. He asked me to choose one, and he taught me how to reproduce it. After hours of practice, I got to the point where I could imitate it quite well. The end result was that they themselves had enjoyed my clumsy attempts and laughed until they were practically weeping, and I had released my tension by reproducing the loud cry of an animal. I told them that there was something truly awesome in my imitation. The relaxation of my body was unequaled. Don Juan said that if I would perfect the cry, I could turn it into an affair of power, or I could simply use it to relieve my tension whenever I needed to. He suggested I should go to sleep, but I was afraid to fall asleep. I sat with them by the kitchen fire for a while, and then, quite unintentionally, I fell into a deep sleep. I woke up at dawn. Don Genaro was sleeping by the door. He seemingly woke up at the same time I did. They had covered me up and folded my jacket as a pillow. I felt very calm and rested. I commented to Don Genaro that I had felt exhausted the night before. He said that so had he. He whispered, as if he were confiding in me, and told me that Don Juan was even more exhausted because he was older. "You and I are young," he said with a glint in his eyes, "but he's old. He must be about 300 now." I sat up hurriedly. Don Genaro covered his face with his blanket and roared with laughter. Don Juan came into the room at that moment. I had a feeling of completement and peace. For once, nothing really mattered. I was so at ease that I wanted to weep. Don Juan said that the night before I had begun to be aware of my luminosity. He admonished me not to indulge in the sense of well-being I was having because it would turn into complacency. "At this moment," I said, "I don't want to explain anything. It doesn't matter what Don Genaro did to me last night." "I didn't do anything to you," Don Genaro retorted. "Look, it's me, Genaro, your Genaro. Touch me." I embraced Don Genaro, and we both laughed like two children. He asked me if I thought it was strange that I could embrace him then when last time I had seen him there I had been unable to touch him. I assured him that those issues were no longer pertinent to me. Don Juan's comment was that I was indulging in being broad-minded and good. "Watch out," he said. "A warrior never lets his guard down. If you keep on being so happy, you're going to drain the little power you have left." "What should I do?" I asked. "Be yourself," he said. "Doubt everything. Be suspicious." "But I don't like to be that way, Don Juan." "It's not a matter of whether you like it or not. What matters is, what can you use as a shield? A warrior must use everything available to him to close his mortal gap once it opens. So it's of no importance that you really don't like to be suspicious or ask questions. That's your only shield now. Right. Right, or you'll die. To die with elation is a crappy way of dying. How should a warrior die, then? Don Genaro asked in exactly my own tone of voice. A warrior dies the hard way, Don Juan said. His death must struggle to take him. A warrior does not give himself to it. Don Genaro opened his eyes to an enormous size and then blinked. What Genaro showed you yesterday is of utmost importance, Don Juan went on. You can't slough it off with piousness. Yesterday you told me that you had been driven wild with the idea of the double, but look at you now. You don't care anymore. That's the trouble with people that go wild. They go wild both ways. Yesterday you were all questions. Today you are all acceptance. I pointed out that he always found a flaw in what I did, regardless of how I did it. That's not true, he exclaimed. There is no flaw in the warrior's way. Follow it and your acts cannot be criticized by anyone. Take yesterday as an example. The warrior's way would have been first to ask questions without fear and without suspicion, and then let Genaro show you the mystery of the dreamer, without fighting him or draining yourself. Today, the warrior's way would be to assemble what you've learned, without presumptuousness and without piousness. Do that, and no one can find flaws in it. I thought, by his tone, that Don Juan must have been terribly annoyed with my blunderings, but he smiled at me, and then giggled as if his own words had made him laugh. I told him that I was just holding back, not wanting to burden them with my probes. I was, indeed, overwhelmed by what Don Genaro had done. I had been convinced, although it no longer mattered, that Don Genaro had been waiting in the bushes for Don Juan to call him. Then later on, he had cashed in on my fright and used it to stun me. After being held forcibly on the ground, I must have undoubtedly passed out, and then Don Genaro must have mesmerized me. Don Juan argued that I was too strong to be subdued that easily. What took place then? I asked him. Genaro came to see you, to tell you something very exclusive, he said. When he came out of the bushes, he was Genaro the Double. There is another way to talk about this that would explain it better, but I can't use it now. Why not, Don Juan? Because you are not ready yet to talk about the totality of oneself. For the time being, I can only say that this Genaro here is not the Double now. He pointed to Don Genaro with a movement of his head. Don Genaro blinked repeatedly. The Genaro of last night was the Double. And as I told you already, the Double has inconceivable power. He showed you a most important issue. In order to do that, he had to touch you. The Double simply tapped you on the neck, on the same spot the ally walked over you years ago. Naturally, you went out like a light. And naturally, too, you indulged like a son of a bitch. It took us hours to round you up. Thus you dissipated your power, and when the time came for you to accomplish a warrior's feat, you did not have enough sap. What was that warrior's feat, Don Juan? I told you that Genaro came to show you something, the mystery of luminous beings as dreamers. You wanted to know about the Double. It begins in dreams, but then you asked, what is the Double? And I said the Double is the self. The self dreams the Double. That should be simple, except that there is nothing simple about us. Perhaps the ordinary dreams of the self are simple, but that doesn't mean that the self is simple. Once it has learned to dream the Double, the self arrives at this weird crossroad, and a moment comes when one realizes that it is the Double who dreams the self. I had written down everything he had said. I had also paid attention to what he was saying, but had failed to understand him. Don Juan repeated his statements. The lesson last night, as I told you, was about the dreamer and the dreamed, or who dreams whom. I beg your pardon, I said. Both of them broke into laughter. Last night, Don Juan proceeded, you almost chose to wake up at the power place. What do you mean, Don Juan? That would have been the feat. If you had not indulged in your stupid ways, you would have had enough power to tip the scales, and you would have, no doubt, scared yourself to death. Fortunately, or unfortunately, as the case may be, you did not have enough power. In fact, you wasted your power in worthless confusion to the point that you almost didn't have enough to survive. So, as you may very well understand, to indulge in your little quirks is not only stupid and wasteful, but also injurious. A warrior that drains himself cannot live. The body is not an indestructible affair. You might have gotten gravely ill. You didn't, simply because Genaro and I deviated some of your crap. The full impact of his words was beginning to take hold of me. Last night Genaro guided you through the intricacies of the double, Don Juan went on. Only he can do that for you, and it was not a vision or a hallucination when you saw yourself lying on the ground. You could have realized that with infinite clarity if you had not gotten lost in your indulging, and you could have known then that you yourself are a dream, that your double is dreaming you in the same fashion that you dreamed him last night. But how can that be possible, Don Juan? No one knows how it happens. We only know that it does happen. That's the mystery of us as luminous beings. Last night, you had 2 dreams, and you could have awakened in either one, but you didn't have enough power even to understand that. They looked at me fixedly for a moment. I think he understands, Don Genaro said.